Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, the ongoing resurrection and restoration of the Klamath River gains steam as the Biden administration puts money where its mouth has been. Also, we'll be joined by Yurok Vice Chairman Frankie Myers to talk about the river, the tribe, and the ongoing plight of missing and murdered Native women and girls. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. I was working at the Times-Standard newsroom in 2002 when the carcasses started to pile up. Warm temperatures, low flows, ill-considered irrigation projects, and a lack of environmental insight all combined to kill tens of thousands of salmon that year in the Klamath River. It was horrific beyond description, and at the time it seemed like a true solution would never be realized. Virtually everyone knew that the cause of the kill could ultimately be traced back to the several dams on the river and the resulting scarcity of water, which led to low flows, warm temperatures, hard feelings, and a political nightmare. For thousands and thousands of years, the Yurok and other tribes had lived along the river and incorporated both its resources and its spirit into their way of life. It in many ways shaped that way of life, and in 2002, they were forced to witness and undergo an apocalypse brought on by mismanagement, lack of care, and a disregard for ecological balance. It was an awful moment. But through this tragedy, many folks who'd previously been blind to the issue were suddenly awakened to the realization that we were indeed killing the river, and that situation needed to change. For the fish, for the tribe, for the river, for everyone. And now, all these years later, we're entering that new world with high hopes and great expectations. But will it be enough? At the same time, in another realm of human experience, tribes are again enduring a stark tragedy that seems inexplicably invisible to the broader world. This time, it's not fish that are dying and disappearing, but human beings. We'll talk about these issues and more in a moment with Yurok Vice Chairman Frankie Myers. But first, talking about the Klamath, the U.S. Department of the Interior this week announced a historic agreement with the Klamath Tribes, Yurok Tribe, Karuk Tribe, and Klamath Water Users Association to advance collaborative efforts to restore the Klamath Basin ecosystem and improve water supply reliability for Klamath area agriculture. Federal officials also announced more than $72 million in new investments, including funding from President Biden's Investing in America legislation for ecosystem restoration and agricultural infrastructure modernization. That's a lot of syllables. Quote, the collaboration and cooperation reached today in the Klamath Basin is a critical step forward as we work to support healthy ecosystems and water reliability in the region for generations to come, said Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. The Interior Department also unveiled a new drought resilience initiative that will support protected species, create new habitat for fish and birds, and change the way water moves across the Klamath Basin to better align agriculture with ecosystem function. The initiative comes as the removal of 4 Klamath dams has begun. A new agreement between tribes and the Klamath Water Users Association will encourage better cooperation while also helping identify, recommend, and support projects that advance restoration goals. Joining us now in the studio is Vice Chairman of the Yurok Tribe, Frankie Myers. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, so thank you for coming in. I know that you're busy right now. There's a campaign going on. You're running for?
State Assembly for District 2.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Like I said when you got here, that you're in the center of a lot of issues right now, so
Yeah.
it's important that we have you on a show like ours. So first, let's talk about missing and murdered Native women and girls. This is an issue that we've seen reported off and on the North Coast and elsewhere. You know, you see the occasional sad article in one of the newspapers or something, but this is a lived reality for tribes on the North Coast. For some reason, and you know, I don't know what to pin it on, but there seems to be a high number of missing and murdered young women and girls from tribes in California especially, and they seem to go unsolved. Can you talk a little bit about that issue and how it's affecting your tribe?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing this topic up. It's such an important issue for us to really bring light to, specifically here in Assembly District 2 on the North Coast, which has some of the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous people in California, which has the 5th highest rate in the nation. There is a holistic view of solving the MMIP crisis because there are so many issues that lean towards our people going missing and murdered, and it's been tragically happening for a long, long time. But it goes back to the Reservation Act. It goes back to the Relocation Act. It goes to our boarding school, the history of boarding school in this country, the lack of funding for health and human services, and then I think an overall policy, for sure, within the federal government, the state as well, to minimize our culture and our way of life. And I think what we are finally seeing now is our ability to speak up for ourselves and bring this issue to light. I think in order to solve this crisis, we have to solve all of the facets that lead up to it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems that from a surface perspective like mine, the most obvious problem is that there are stereotypes that are sometimes employed to excuse absences that would otherwise be a source of alarm in another community. And I think that getting the information out, talking about educating people is one way to correct those mistakes, I guess you could call them. How would you grade local officials? I mean, you are dealing with both the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office and the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office. Do you feel like both are doing all they can, or would you like to see more, and not to be critical necessarily, but just constructively,
No, I think you have to be honest about where we are at and the position we're in. And I think having just come from watching the Super Bowl, well, we had one of our mascots shown there. I think what we're trying to say is we need to be visible and we can't be overlooked. On a national level, that is a huge problem. In California, it's also an issue. I would commend what we have done locally, working with our partners in Humboldt and Del Norte County, ensuring that we have cross-deputization with our tribal police so that we can actually go and investigate when people go missing has been huge. And so I think we've come a long way, specifically here locally, in changing people's views on our tribal culture, but also working the relationship between tribal governments and non-tribal governments, which can lead to its own set of issues. The issue, though, that remains is that the problem has to be solved holistically. So as much good work as we're doing here locally between Humboldt and Del Norte County, that's not enough. It has to be resolved on the state level and the national level. A lot of our people end up leaving this area, leaving the North Coast, either going to Oregon or to Central and Southern California. And ensuring that we have a message that spans outside of our local community is one of the things we're really trying to focus on, with the realization that in California, everywhere is Indian country. That you have Native people all over the place, San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, just like you do up here, and recognizing that the problem is systemic and it's across the entire state.
Just to give people a sense of what we are looking at in Northern California, according to an article I found on your guys' website, 20 cases of missing women are recorded each year in Northern California, and that just keeps growing. And the article pointed out that that's actually a low number, that the part of the issue is records keeping, and sometimes that, so the numbers like that get squirrely, but that would be a low estimate.
And it's gotten worse. As we've been able to dig into the data and really start investigating these cases, we were 7th in the nation, and now we're 5th. And now a lot of that has to do with how much is being seen now, how much is being reported. A lot of the cases simply weren't being reported because we didn't feel like reporting was going to do anything.
You guys were recently given $350,000. I say given, it was a grant, or from the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians for an investigator. Could you talk a little bit about how that might facilitate, progress?
It's huge. As Native communities, as a Native person myself, in our culture, we have a systemic lack of trust in outside governments and outside help. And I think what this showed is our tribal community stepping up to the plate. We're not just asking the state to solve the problem or the federal government, but we're also looking at our own resources and what we can do. And one thing that we could do is collaborate on projects like our investigator that will be looking at all the cases, not just for the Yurok tribe, but all cases of missing and murdered indigenous people. I think it's a phenomenal example that we're trying to state that we can solve some of these problems ourselves, and where we can solve them, we should solve them. And coming together to collaborate really is the answer. Most of it is systemic within the state and the federal government, but some of these issues that we can solve are just a matter of collaborating.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like you guys are working hard on that issue, and deservedly so. So moving on a little bit, I wanted to talk about wind power.
Yeah.
Now, there was a contrast that I noticed a few weeks ago. There was a bunch of celebration because there was a lot of money that was suddenly allocated to the Humboldt County area, $426 million, I think it was, for the development of the harbor so that it would support ultimately an industry that will be wind power generating off the coast of our, the Pacific here. The Yuroks were there, and they were excited as well. But there was a caveat that I sensed, and it came up later on at a workshop that you guys had hosted, where you're like, not so fast. There are issues here that we need to address before we, just give the green light and start handing out, gold medals or whatever. And I was struck by another thing I read that you had mentioned, where there was a history for the tribe that's gone on since basically, white settlers arrived in this country, where first it was gold, and then it was dams, then it was logs, and now is it going to be wind? That's the question, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Are they going to make this an exploitative, an extractive kind of process where, the indigenous groups who live around there are ignored or worse, subjugated and abused just so that they can get that resource rather than making them a part overall of the technology, the wealth generation, all of that. How do you feel like it went? Was that message heard? And how can you, as a community, make sure that you are, a respected member of the process as it unfolds?
The biggest question we're asking ourselves right now as tribal leaders and tribal people is, have we learned our lessons? Have we learned from the mistakes of our past? And whether you're talking about the gold rush, logging industry, or commercial fishing, have we developed far enough that we can see a project for what it is and not push forward for progress sake? So many times in our history, we have been told.
That is a deep flaw in our pushing forward for projects. That's just what
absolutely.
We do almost.
It's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we do. We lean into it. We swing the pendulum the other way. And what we're trying to convey and what we want federal regulators and the general public to understand is we need to take a balanced approach. We have to look at this holistically and look at it for what it is. It's an industry coming into our area. It's simply marking it with a green stamp to go ahead because we're calling it renewable isn't the right path. That's the same path that we've been on before. We have to look at this in a balanced, holistic approach and ensuring that every step of the way that it's truly going to be beneficial for not only our community, but the globe. The last thing we want to do is make the crisis worse by trying to push a project that may not be the golden egg that we think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like, the tenor I got from the workshop that you guys held was that you don't feel like you've been involved enough up to this point. To your mind, what would an appropriate process look like from First Nation status? Like, how should you have been included, and how might that change in the future? Is there a way?
I think that the easy answer to this is we've already had this discussion on a national level, and it's the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Right? It is outlined very clearly on how you engage with First Nations, Indigenous, Native American people before you begin the process. I think we've seen vast improvements from the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management on their consultation process from where they started. But let's be honest, where they started was pretty bad. It was a pretty bad hole. So even the improvements were done, there's still a need to improve what we've done. I think on the other side is we have to look at the system as a whole as well, as far as how corporations work within the American system, and ensuring that we are both represented on the federal side for consultation, but also on the private side as well, ensuring that the companies who are coming in here and looking to develop these projects are also taking responsibility and engaging with us in a meaningful way.
It seems like throughout American history, there's always been, human rights are important, or the native tribes should be protected, but this other thing is really, really important. Like, you talk about manifest destiny, and people needed places to live, or they needed jobs, they needed something along those lines. Now it's like we need clean energy. We need to be able to have, get off of fossil fuels and whatnot. But to blindly go forward, like you said, progress for progress's sake, without judging or accurately getting a sense of what the repercussions will be downstream, again, I think it could be problematic. Overall, though, the tribe hasn't taken a position on the dams, or on the, not dams, on the wind power?
We've taken a very clear position on the dams, but we haven't taken a position on offshore wind because we don't know what it's going to look like. And I think no one does. We're developing this industry right now. I think that's what causes concern, but also causes us to lean into this. Because if we're going to develop the industry, I think we have a responsibility to make sure the industry is developed in a way that truly is equitable for communities and the earth around us. I think that is why we have been so heavily engaged in this process. We know we have to do something about climate change. We know we have to take bold actions, that we have to move away from fossil fuels. But as our traditional values teach us, we also have to look at the core reasons why we are in this position, the amount of necessity that we bring forward in our day-to-day lives, the overall greed we have for want of more, for always wanting to consume. And I think what we're saying is that let's not only address the problems that are coming from the issue, but the core issue itself that we have as a society. We could meet our renewable energy goals tomorrow if we lessened our demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we made the commitment to do so. This is all pattyfoot, kind of, you know what I mean? And not to say I don't support the project or anything like that, but it is complex, and I find it a bit rich when people talk about, Native Americans possibly holding up progress on this regard when they've been telling everyone all along to be responsible about the environment.
There is a bit of irony. There's a bit of irony, yes.
Speaking of which, we talked about that history of gold to dams to logs to wind. That was all centered around the Klamath River. We have now recently made some progress on a long-standing effort to get the dams removed off the Klamath River and restore the free-flowing riverway. And they've removed one dam, I guess, and the other three are now free-flowing. And all of this stems out of the 2002 fish kill, which I happened to be working at the Time Standard at the time. And it was, besides September 11, 2001, which was like 2 weeks after I started, it was one of the more somber moments we had the whole time I was there. It was a lot of dead fish, but more than that, it was almost a statement from nature about what's really going on and what can happen if you, abdicate don't follow up on your responsibilities. So that's enough about my speech. How do you feel about where the river's going? The Biden administration has released some new money, and they are trying to encourage cooperation among the various stakeholders. Give us an update and a status report on where all that stands and how you guys feel about where the river is at this moment.
So I was a fisheries technician during the 2002 fish kill, out there actually counting the fish. I'll tell you, it still lives with me to this very day. The progress we've seen from the devastating impacts of the fish kill in 2002 to this new MOU that we signed with all of the stakeholders in the basin, along with the funding, was amazing. For us, dam removal was never the goal. It was an opportunity to reach our goal, which is holistic restoration, looking at our basin and our communities as one system. And it was important for us to ensure that not only do we have a free-flowing river, but we have sustainable communities. The world we live in now, the world that we exist in now, it has to be brought back into balance. And it's not a matter of destroying communities, it's building what we have. It's building communities in a sustainable way and ensuring that we're fighting for our neighbors as much as we're fighting for ourselves. I think this MOU is a testament to what we can do when we hold true to our values, when we learn the lessons of the past, and then we move forward. I'm really quite grateful for the federal government to come through with the much needed funding that we need. At the end of the day, these are big problems, and there is a lot of funding that's needed to help fix them, but we're on the right path now. We have a free-flowing river, we have an agreement to work together, and we have funding coming to solve some of these huge problems.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit in our conversation earlier about the differences in the river, that it's just different now because the water can flow. I had mentioned that the Smith River to me feels different than some of the other rivers because it is obviously undammed. Can you talk a little bit about the differences you've noticed? And in particular, you mentioned the smell. I found that fascinating.
There's a huge dramatic visual difference. When you drive up the river, you can see, you go to where the reservoirs were, and you can see the river again. which was what previously you would look out and you'd see a big, flat reservoir, and now you see a river flowing. One of the things that caught me by surprise on my trip home after watching the last dam be breached, you could smell the difference in the river. And usually up there, there is a bit of a stagnant kind of smell that comes with the river. On my way home that night, it felt like the whole river valley had the smell of the decomposing sedimentary rock, the smell that I'm used to at home from the creeks that we live next to. To smell that in the river again felt like fresh life. It felt like there was a renewal happening, not just in the river, but in the atmosphere. You could feel it. And you could literally feel it. You could feel the rocks smashing together. Sure. You could feel the vibration coming
it's like
off the
river.
The
infrasounds of the rumble and the stuff. Yeah, it's amazing.
It was a very emotional time for us, having worked, over 20 years on this, to see the transformation, to be there and watch a river come back to life, brought so much hope. And I think it's that hope that we're seeing from dam removal that pushes us to do more. Right, pushes us to continue the restoration that's needed, continuing to push for the funding to ensure that our agricultural community is taken care of and that we could live holistically again.
Yeah, and it seems to me that it demonstrates that this kind of work, difficult though it may be, can ultimately be effective, even though sometimes the permitting agencies and the bureaucrats, they're not listening, or they got their heads stuck somewhere else. Ultimately, and hopefully not always because of a fish kill of that magnitude, but they can learn and they can get to that responsible place. It's interesting for several reasons. I had done a story about one of your employees for the tribe before, who was a firefighter, but someone who was advising the state on how to do burns, and so that you minimize the spread of fire, and basically you're not phobic about fire starting. You actually try to manage it and help keep the forest in a healthy place. That story sort of unlocked for me this progress that's happened in recent years, where a lot of the indigenous knowledge that we've long either scoffed at or ignored under new, intellectual regimes, suddenly we're like going back and like, well, actually that's a really good idea. And it's not just this; it's in a lot of different areas. And I wonder how it feels to you as a Native person. Is there a little bit of an "I told you so" brewing back there, or are you just happy to see progress?
No, absolutely. Of course, it's like, well, yeah, of course we do this for thousands of years. But it's this moment where Western science is finally catching up to what our indigenous science has told us for thousands of years, and it is exciting. Yeah. At the end of the day, we don't care how we get to where we're at. It's the matter of applying those principles that we've learned. And 10 years ago, you have a conversation about how fire can cool a river down, and you'd be laughed out of the room. Yeah. You bring that conversation up now, and not only is it being implemented, and not only now do people understand more so than ever the connection between cultural burning and prescribed burning and healthy communities and a healthy river, but they're doing something about it. And I think when you see and talk to families who have gone through catastrophic wildfire, there is the question, did it have to happen? Why are we living in a world where catastrophic wildfire is so dangerous? Yes. And I think there is a solution, and people are starting to recognize that now, that what we've known about this place, that we've learned from being here for tens of thousands of years, is absolutely as applicable today as it was 200 years ago, and as important to healthy communities now than it ever was.
Yeah, if not more so.
If not
because
more
we're so out of balance now
Absolutely.
That we need that balance even more desperately. Because of the work the Yurok tribe has done, in the future, it is highly likely that there's going to be a young member of the Yurok tribe next to the river, hopefully having a moment, looking up, seeing a condor land in a tree that was otherwise virtually extinct, at least locally. You guys have done a lot of important work. Can you talk a little bit about how the restoration of the river, when it ultimately gets to the place where you'd like to see it, how important that is to you culturally, and what it does in terms of your tribal identity?
I think the goal for me is to one day have our people fishing in a river, catching salmon that are no longer endangered, by being overseen with condors that are no longer endangered, and going swimming in a pond created by beaver that are no longer endangered. Absolutely. To have a ecosystem that we are a part of is fully connected. That's what my dream is. When I was a young man growing up on the river, that's what I had dreamed I could do. I think one day we will get there if we continue on the path we're on.
Yeah. Speaking of your big dreams, last subject here, but you are running for the state assembly.
Correct.
So some of these native notions about management and smart use of land and resources, I'm sure are a part of your platform. Can you talk a little bit about, more generally, why you want to serve and what you think you could bring to that office that would otherwise be missing?
Representation matters, and having a voice in Sacramento that comes from my perspective, that has seen what I have seen and has built what we've built at Yurok and has the experience that I have, isn't there. And I think it's needed. When you don't have those voices, you get what we have seen for the last 100 years, which is a push towards progress for progress' sake, the devastation of our forest. Assemblymember Ramos, the first California Native American ever elected to the Assembly, has made huge progress in California. The work that we've done on the North Coast as a tribal leader has its limits. There are positions and places that we need to be at that you can only be at as an elected official of the state of California. It's one of the reasons why I'm running. I also think what we have accomplished and the models of success that we've seen for housing, for healthcare, for restorative justice, for community policing, these are models that work just as well in Shelter Cove, Hayfork, Santa Rosa. There's no place that doesn't struggle with law enforcement, with public safety, with criminal justice, with housing. We have models based on our traditions that are successful. And I keep saying, I'm not running because of the failures of California. I'm running because of the successes of the tribe.
Exactly right. And I think at an era when maybe some of those successes are starting to be recognized, maybe you have, there's a hot iron to whack with your political hammer there.
we hope so. I hope so for
metaphor,
sure.
But yeah. All right, so well, I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
The conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back soon. Thanks
Absolutely.
for all you've done for the river and everyone else. So.
Welcome.
That's it for this evening. Real quick, I wanted to remind you that if you missed the voting forums, the voter forums with the League of Women Voters, which we produced and aired on this channel, never fear, we've got your back. All the forums are now available on our YouTube channel for consideration and perusal. The assembly race is not up there. I think they're waiting to November, but anyway, so there's that. Stay tuned, stay informed.